Good morning to everybody, and thank you very much for participating to this webinar, Air Canada Cargo, Innovating the Global Supply Chain. We're extremely happy to have today here some representative officials from Air Canada Cargo. I want to thank very much Tony Altomare and ITL for having sponsored this webinar. Today with me, there are also two other partners that I want to introduce. Let me just tell you about the rules of the game. We're gonna have Mr. John Tory speaking, and eventually we're gonna have a Q&A. You have a Q&A button that you can use for addressing the other panelists, John Tory and other two panelists. And please ask us as many questions as you wish. I want to be very quick because I want to go to the core of the matter, the future, the present, the past. And today we talk about the future of the Air Canada and the Air Canada Cargo, the freight industry. As you know, we had a few days ago another webinar on programs offered by the government to small and medium-sized businesses. We're planning to have more and more webinars related to different sectors of the economy. Without further ado, I want to introduce Matteo Picariello, manager and CEO of the Italian Trade Italian Trade Office here in Canada. Matteo, thank you.
Grazie, Corrado. Good morning to everybody. And just a few words to say that as the Italian Trade Commission, we were very happy to join and support the Chamber initiative together with the EU Chamber, because we believe that Italy, as many other European countries, are made mostly by SMEs, small-size enterprises. And for them, especially in these times, logistics, transportation, and better understanding how to approach other countries is very relevant. And as well for their counterparts, Canadian companies wishing to do business with Italy and the EU. And as such, we are here, happy to be here with you all. And I'm not gonna take any longer. I'm very curious and happy to listen to all the speakers. And I say hi to my friend Tony, and say thank you also to Air Canada Cargo. Thank you, Corrado.
Thank you, Matteo. And now we have Stephen Klaas, the president of EUCCAN. Actually, Stephen, if you can spend a few words to tell us exactly what is EUCCAN, would be good for our audience. Thank you.
Certainly. First of all, good morning to all the esteemed members of today's panel and presenting partners, and to all of you in attendance today. It's a great pleasure to be collaborating with Air Canada Cargo and today's expert speakers. This year, the European Union Chamber of Commerce in Canada marks its 25th year since inception, and I'm very proud to say that the Italian Chamber of Commerce was an original founding member back in 1995. And as I must say, you know, Italy is a fundamental part of the EU framework on all aspects. And EUCCAN is the business voice of Europe in Canada and is committed to supporting European business in Canada and from Europe. Of course, the global supply chain and air freight is fundamental to our endeavors, and I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. And I'm very pleased to introduce now Tony Altomare, a sponsor with his company, ITL, is the owner and president, and is also the president, the co-president of the Italian Chamber of Commerce of Ontario. Tony, it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Corrado. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. A very good morning to all of you. Thank you for participating in our webinar, Air Canada, Innovation in the Global Supply Chain. As Corrado mentioned, my name is Tony Altomare, and I am the president of ITL-Inter-Transport. For the past 32 years, ITL has been providing freight forwarding services to importers and exporters in Canada and throughout the world, with particular specialization in the movement of temperature-controlled goods, hazardous goods, industrial and consumer goods, pharmaceuticals, and medical products. Over the past 32 years, the cargo industry has gone through difficult periods caused by economic volatility, geopolitical unrest, terrorism, and many other events and circumstances that have adversely affected our industry and our global supply chain. What we have experienced in the past, however, pales in comparison to the extraordinary conditions created for our industry by the COVID-19 pandemic. Businesses have been forced to close, people forced to stay home, airplanes grounded, and entire countries closed for business. Yet our business was deemed an essential service charged with the responsibility of keeping the supply chain moving, and in particular, products like foodstuffs, medical equipment, pharmaceuticals, and personal protective products. And while the past few months have been the most difficult for our industry, I am very thankful that we have had the support and commitment of our national carrier, Air Canada. Air Canada has continued to be there for our cargo shipments and has continued to fly, notwithstanding the fact that they have had little to no passengers, which how they generate a good portion of their revenue. Air Canada Cargo has really stepped up to the plate and has been truly instrumental in ensuring that the supply chain keeps moving while most everything else has stopped. Their pilots, ground crew, warehouse employees are all frontline heroes who go to work every day knowing that they could be in harm's way of this terrible virus. So a big thank you to them and to Air Canada. And a big thanks as well to our keynote speakers, Air Canada Cargo's Managing Director of Sales and Commercial Strategy, Mr. Vito Cerone, who is joining us from Montreal, and Air Canada Cargo's Director of Cargo for Europe, Middle East, and India, Mr. John Lloyd, joining us from London, England. Thank you both for being here today and for your participation in today's webinar. I also wish to thank ICCO, EUCCAN, and the Italian Trade Agency for organizing the webinar, and Air Canada for making this possible. At this time, I'm honored to introduce our moderator, Mr. John Tory, Director of Business Development for Air Canada, and as some of you may recognize the name, John is also the son of Toronto's Mayor, John Tory. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tony, for that, or Corrado, for that introduction, and thank you, everybody, to the two chambers, to the various agencies who are on here, to our distinguished guests, and to our hosts. Sometimes I do get introduced with the coincidence of my name, and I do just like to give the warning that unlike what you hear in Proverbs, apples do fall far from trees. And so if you're expecting extremely distinguished leadership from me, you probably want to change your channel. That having been said, it's a relationship I'm very proud of, and so thank you for that introduction. I, more importantly in my business life, have been part of Air Canada for coming up on 1 year now, having joined from our regional department, and what an interesting year it has been. To see this type of change going from some of the most phenomenal success that the airline industry has ever known to literally a time when many airlines are questioning their very existence and survival in a few years or months' time has been upending, to say the least. And we sit here as an industry, as was mentioned by Tony, that connects the world mostly through people. And we just question what our world is going to look like going forward. One of the bright points and optimistic lights that we have is that cargo is often a leading indicator of what is happening in the world. And we are seeing that the world still needs to move goods, and the world is now starting to think about how we're going to move goods in the future. We wanted to take advantage of this time in front of such a fantastic, educated, and needing audience to outline how Air Canada is there for you, how we're there for you during this bridge of time when, as we talked about, people are less willing or more restricted from flying, how cargo is taking over, if you will, to make sure that our airplanes are still able to fly while keeping our employees healthy and safe, and how we are still connecting the world. Air Canada has a long history of connection between Italy, Europe, and Canada, and Ontario in particular. There are strong business connections, there are cultural connections, there are personal connections. And Air Canada is proud to be part of all of those and to have been part of those connections throughout much of the history of industrial Canada. Today, we are looking at a story of adaptation. We are looking at corporations who adapt, but we are also looking at collections of peoples, whether they're people who call themselves Canadians or Italians or who identify as members of the larger European community. We are seeing what adaptation does to ourselves in terms of the demands it places on us and the triumphs that we can all achieve as we learn how to adapt and to manage ourselves. Perhaps the most important thing is that we retain that element of compassion and understanding and patience as we start to come back to what we all consider normal. That adaptation, compassion, and patience that we showed during these challenging times as the worst of the virus was upon us, and as now we start to emerge into this adapted reality, and we remember what that is all like, so that we can get back to normal in a way where we are all working together. Air Canada Cargo is able to be there to move your goods. We have found ways to adapt our teams, to adapt our equipment, to adapt our procedures. And in the heavily regulated world of air travel and air freight, we did so at relative lightning speed. So I think that we have some discussion items that we're going to have, myself, John, and Vito, with you, the audience, and we welcome your feedback and your questions by using the Q&A link that's available on your app. We are expecting a fair number of questions, so I apologize if we don't get to yours, but we'll do our best to answer everything that ties in with the flow of this discussion. The plan is to talk in this format for about half an hour, and then we will get into the Q&A portion of the event. We had a discussion going, and we're going to get in a very short order to the sustainability of our all cargo operation and what that looks like to our members. If we could ask everybody who is listening right now and who is not expecting to speak, which should be most of you, to please mute your microphone. Vito, I'm going to start with you, and good morning, Vito and John, my colleagues from Air Canada, who are hundreds or thousands of kilometers away from me right now. But Vito, we had this very interesting introduction by Tony, where he highlighted all of the great things that our various companies are doing, including ITL-Inter-Transport. Tony being in the freight forwarding and logistics business himself. And of course, after this call, we are expecting he's going to direct all of his air freight business to Air Canada. Air Canada Cargo, but maybe because we have a lot of participants who are small to medium enterprises themselves or who work with them, if you could just take 3 or 4 minutes, and then John, maybe add the European flavor to that. How does somebody who maybe hasn't dealt with Air Canada Cargo in the past or isn't sure if their goods are going on Air Canada Cargo, how do they become part of the Air Canada Cargo family? Vito?
First of all, John, thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to attend the session. I'd like to thank Matteo, Stephen, Corrado, and Tony. So first of all, let me go back as far as Air Canada is concerned. Most people aren't aware that Air Canada actually we carry cargo. Everyone perceives Air Canada as the airline carrying the passengers, and being the national carrier, we play a key critical role in the supply chain, not only of Canada, but globally. We've now become a key service provider, logistics service provider in the supply chain. So we mostly deal, our partners globally, we're part of a supply chain. We deal with freight forwarders, we deal with shippers who deal directly with freight forwarders. And the global freight forwarders, whether they're the global or they're small, medium size, and they know Air Canada. They know the services we offer, the products that we offer, whether it's pharma, ambient, perishable, just general type of goods, we carry it. And pre-COVID-19, we're serving over 50 countries, over 200 cities globally. And so we made our footprint, and we've been continuously finding ways to improve our process and way of doing business. And as Tony alluded to, more so than ever, it's going to become critical in the future because there's going to be some significant changes. But our small, medium-sized shippers can deal with the freight forwarding community, and you know what, encourage them to use Air Canada if they don't do so today. Thank you, John.
Mr. Lloyd, good morning, and maybe some tips you could add with a European perspective on how people can find Air Canada Cargo through their freight forwarder.
Thanks, John. Hi, everybody, and just echo Vito's words. Really, thanks to everyone for inviting us. It's a real privilege. So I'm kind of newish to Air Canada. I only joined last year, well, beginning of 2019. Prior to that, I headed up the cargo division for Virgin Atlantic. And I got the opportunity to join Air Canada, and after doing a bit of research, I've got to be honest, it was a little bit surprised to me the scale of our operation in Europe. So we have over 400 flights a week in normal times 400 flights a week in and out of the European region into 40 airports. So it's a pretty significant operation, like Vito said. Yeah, obviously, anything we can do to help would be fantastic. If you, small to medium guys, if you engage with the freight forwarders, we can pretty much service out of pretty much any major airport. We obviously at the moment we've got a very reduced schedule, but that we're hoping to ramp up very shortly, as we'll talk about soon. But yeah, overall, yeah, very, very pleased to be here. Anything we can do to help, then great. So.
Thank you, gentlemen, for introducing yourselves to us and for that brief how-to on how people can find Air Canada Cargo and work with their freight forwarder to make sure that their goods fly around the best way possible. The first question, I'll start with you, Vito, as somebody in a senior leadership role at Air Canada Cargo, and it has to do with the word we hear often is the word sustainability. But my question is sustainability from the standpoint of our ability to continue this. We, in the face of falling demand or travel restrictions for our passenger services, have converted many aircraft to freighters or we're operating belly-owned services. Air freight at mainline carriers typically exists as a complementary product to the passenger product. Many would argue today that we have flipped that equation around, but Air Canada's planes are passenger planes. So how long are we able to keep this up?
Well, John, first of all, what we've been able to do and accomplish as a team, as an industry in the last, I'd say, roughly 2 months is unbelievable. It's a total business transformation from, like you had just mentioned, is that we are a passenger airline at the end of the day. And not that passenger solely dictates the routes we operate, but majority of routes are dictated by the passenger because that's where the majority of our revenue comes from. But as a result of this crisis, we got into a mode of thinking outside the box. And within a number of weeks, we started flying airplanes, the 787s, and we just used the belly without the passengers on the top. And then what happened was, with discussions between VP Operations, Mr. Richard Steer, and our VP Cargo, Tim Strauss, we wanted to put freight on seats like most other of our competitors are doing today. And Richard Steer essentially said, you know what? There's 777s that are going into maintenance. We can delay those maintenance. Why don't we remove the seats and you operate a full cargo type operation, which we started doing. And as a result of that, we've got 4 777s, all cargo, and now we've converted 3 A330s all cargo. As you can see behind me, this is a 777 passenger cabin, which was loaded with cargo, which came in from Asia. We started this concept from Asia, the right product, so at the end of the day, as far as sustainability is concerned, it's collectively as an industry, we must help each other. We've come up with these creative solutions for the industry, for part of this supply chain, and we were able to continue that supply chain. But at the end of the day, these airplanes aren't designed as they are right now for cargo only. We depend heavily on the passenger revenue. So moving forward, we need to make sure that we're able to sustain the right revenue and continue to grow. And just to give you a quick example, in the month of April, we operated over 500 of these legs in the month of April. And it's with only cargo uplift only. So it's been a really great news story overall. But moving forward, we need to collaborate collectively, from a shipper, from forwarders, from an industry, from a supply chain, and say, okay, how do we move forward to make sure that we can sustain this? Thanks, John.
Thank you very much. And John, Lloyd, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that with the perspective of the European destinations we presently serve, what we would consider some of our connecting hubs previously. Did you want to add anything to that in terms of what you're seeing from the standpoint of sustainability of all cargo? If nothing to add, then we do have a follow-up question about the conversion.
No, just to really add to what Vito was saying, really, I was, again, like I said, being relatively new, I was incredibly pleasantly surprised and shocked how quickly we adapted those aircraft. There's a lot of really huge airlines out there which are moving freight in the cabin, but they're actually loading it on the seats. So which is obviously pretty restrictive, whereas the speed that we managed to adapt those aircraft was really impressive. Obviously, we've got other aircraft that are coming in, which obviously we're loading just the belly as well. In terms of the main deck loading ones, we've moved them so far into Amsterdam and Copenhagen. We've done Tel Aviv. We've also done Zurich, and obviously we're hoping we're going to start to go a little bit further south into Milan. So looking forward to seeing those aircraft there soon.
Vito, in fact, the conversion is something that drew a lot of media attention from us, that it's set us apart for sure, Air Canada Cargo, as industry leaders. We had a major call to action in the earliest days of the North American exposure or bloom of the virus, and some operations as we saw in Europe and in the Far East. We were able to convert our airplanes quickly. And some of these conversions took place at what in a regulated environment we would consider to be light speed. And we weren't able to meet in person to do design and review and inspection. So that involves significant cooperation between our labor groups, our regulators, us as the operator, and international agencies. Like, did we have these plans ready? Do you guys sit around and write these stuff up during normal days, or did this all come together just so fast? How did we plan for these scenarios, and how did you guys execute?
Well, you know, John, it's funny you mention, you know, globally, Air Canada, from a cargo perspective, we're in the top 20 global carriers. But we're always nimble. We always keep low key, but we always punch above the belt. And with this one, we were one of the first ones to actually transform passenger aircrafts into cargo. And remember, these are not, like I mentioned earlier, they're not cargo aircrafts per se, because what you see in back of me on the passenger side, you can only carry about 10 tons, but it's over 120 cubic meters. But what was fascinating about this is not only the labor groups, how we were able to get the seats removed with a third party that does this for Air Canada, and also how we work with the regulators, with Transport Canada, to get this inspection passed. And it was novel. And it happened all within 7 days. And really, this is about business transformation, and not only from an Air Canada perspective, for any business, right? You're put in a situation and you have two choices. You either react to the situation and go with a positive attitude towards it, or you just sit and lay back. And many of our other competitors, you know what, they just in the last couple of weeks, they started emulating what we've been doing. And I have to compliment the airline in general, the global airlines. We've taken, you know what, we've taken a leap forward, finding different ways of carrying cargo, and kudos to everyone. But once again, like, just this alone was total business transformation. You had to be agile. We had to take risks, and which we did. You know, we weren't sure whether it was going to work, but you know what, we did it, and it was really a collaborative effort. And it clearly shows that in time of crisis, how industry comes together to ensure that certain things continue to happen.
Well, thank you very much. I found the whole thing quite fascinating, and I will just take 10 seconds here to thank on behalf of all of us, those of us who are customers, those of us who are employees, and those of us who count on all of the things that move on our aircraft, whether it's in passenger days or in our all cargo days, the cooperation and quick response of all of the regulators, including Transport Canada, the maintenance facility, our labor groups, our employees, our management. So thank you guys very much. It was all done safely, efficiently, and quickly, and it's working. Over like hundreds of flights a week are taking place now in this all cargo world, and seriously, that is because teams of people did not sleep for about a week and a half as they planned this out. Anybody who has experience in a regulated business knows that to make a major equipment conversion and have it certified for operation in a week and a half is just unbelievable. So now we've talked about what has happened, and we talked about where we are today in terms of what we're operating, and I thank you guys for that perspective. We are going to get to innovation. I did just want to add a small note to the people sending in questions. Well, we appreciate your demands to see Air Canada show up at every city and airport close to you. Please know that today the focus of our discussion is not going to be on our expanded route network, as that is something that is being managed as the situation unfolds. So while we appreciate certainly that you would like us to fly everywhere in the world and come close to you, and we want to be able to do that, that is not something that we are going to be able to comment on extensively today unless it's been announced. But we do see your questions, and thank you. So talking about innovation, we have billed ourselves as Air Canada Cargo as a center of innovation, as a part of the business that is responsible for innovation, things like artificial intelligence and our management of data. And some of that investment in data involves, to a degree, having a crystal ball in terms of making predictions and investments, but nobody today has a crystal ball of where the world is going to be. You know, some people say we're going to exclusively work from home. Some people have said that the big winner of the new travel business is Zoom. And, you know, we've heard these predictions before when times are tough. But interestingly, whatever people choose to do in terms of travel, they need goods, they need freight. And Air Canada Cargo is an industry leader. We are innovating with a whole bunch of different suites of things, but primarily we've talked a lot, Vito, about data and sharing and tracking and what it means. And we talk about who our partners are and why we need to share data with our partners, and that being that our partners being part of the flow, not only the flow of the goods, but the flow of the data is essential to future efficiency. Can you talk a little bit about how Air Canada Cargo is innovating in the cargo space, in the data and AI space?
Sorry, John, you kind of cut off there. So if I picked up on most of your question, really is how are we going to move forward with technology, with data, and all that? So
and sharing and tracking with our partners. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you very much, John. And so what's important, we started about a year ago. Like most companies are aware, moving forward, what's key is really data. Data is going to be part of this whole supply chain. AI plays a role, and later I'll ask John to give you an example of how we use AI in Europe and how it's worked well for the shippers, how it's worked well for the forwarding community. But data is very key. And what do I mean by that? Well, moving forward in tomorrow's world, we all know that goods are still going to be moving around. We all know people will be moving around. It's just now, it's a little bump on the road that we've experienced right now. So moving forward, we know we need to work with AI, get the data from manufacturing all the way to the delivery at the end consumer. It's going to become so critical moving forward. So we started working. We're the first company, airline that's worked with AI. It's been over a year. We've got a group, and they're looking at different models of how AI is going to work. And we want to use AI and share it with the with our freight forwarders, share it with shippers, because I think it's integral part of moving forward. And when we talk about data, is we all know everyone wants to know where simple things like everyone wants to know where their goods are. Everyone wants to know whether certain activities are going to happen so these goods get manufactured, get produced. So there's a lot of data out there that will help us determine what the future is going to look like. And let's not forget, what's also important is what we're seeing, and we've all seen this, is the exponential growth of e-commerce. We've seen the Amazon, the Alibabas, the JD.coms of this world in the last number of years growing substantially. And in the last month and a half, 2 months, you've seen that growth exponential. E-commerce is going to be there. But remember one thing, it's not only the big guys. E-commerce is also for the small, medium-sized companies. And it's how do you take advantage of it? And if you look at, and I have to praise companies like the Alibabas, the Amazons, and JD.coms, because, and the Shopify is another one, a Canadian company. What they've been able to do is take the data and help the whole supply chain and use that data to make it more efficient for everyone. So moving forward, there's going to be a lot of that to make the process, the re-engineering of things more efficient. John, maybe you can give an example of how we use AI in Europe to help the freight forwarder communities and shipping community.
Yeah, thanks, Vito. Like Peter said, we got a big initiative going on from an AI point of view, just generally within Air Canada, but cargo is kind of used as a pilot, really. And in particular, the European region, we've been doing a lot of first testing on various initiatives. One which has been incredibly successful is actually around our capacity management. So probably one of the most perishable commodities that we've got is that space in the bellies of the aircraft, and obviously the upper deck as well now. So once that plane takes off, if there's even 2 or 3 kilos of space left on that plane, it's wasted. So it's incredibly important that we manage that capacity as accurately as possible. But we're now in this world of trying to predict exactly how much space there's going to be on the plane, and there's so many different variables in there in terms of how many passengers are actually going to turn up on the day, because obviously any passengers that don't turn up, then there's more space downstairs for us. It's also in terms of exactly which freight shipments are going to turn up, in terms of the volumes that are going to turn up, and sometimes we can actually then start to predict exactly, right down to the kilo, exactly how much space we're going to have on that flight, which, apart from allowing us to maximize the plane, which is good for us, what it actually means is we're finding that it's actually meaning that we can actually open up more capacity for sale to our customers, where in the past perhaps we'd have closed the flight off and maybe it might have actually departed with a couple of tons free on it. We can now actually sell that capacity a lot more confidently. We know that that's going to be there. So it's pretty advanced stuff, and it's working out really well. We're quite a long way down with that one. We're now moving on to various other different initiatives in terms of things like pricing and things like that. And it's a big one for us.
And John, both John and John, I also want to, once again, it's Vito. I also want to, once again, we also, just for the innovation component, we've been working with a company from Toronto and Drones Delivery Canada. And we've partnered with them about 6 months ago, but we've been working with them for collaboratively over a year. And Drones Delivery Canada, which is a startup, by the way, by 2 Italo Canadians, Tony and Paul Di Benedetto. And what they were able to vision was using the drones for transportation of goods short distances. And so we engaged with them over 6 months ago. And moving forward, we're seeing globally the demand for drones. And that's just another way of innovation on the logistics side. It's something that will be coming forward in Canada eventually within the next, hopefully, a month or so. We are using it in northern communities, and we will be working with Transport Canada, and hopefully we can have it within the urban cities, not too short from short distance from now.
Yes, and we certainly hope that they remember how to operate at light speed when we're going in front of them, asking them to certify our drone operation or our proposals for them. Something tells me that the things may slow down a little bit. John, Lloyd, you mentioned interestingly that the challenges or the complexity of getting freight to the airplane and being able to optimize and maximize our efficiency there, because of course the part that a lot of people don't necessarily think about day to day is that our price that we are able to command is set by the market entirely. And we are competing not only with other passenger airliners that put goods in the belly like we do, or in today's case, we're still operating passenger airplanes, for example, without pallet loading doors on the passenger level, but we're just operating them with more cargo or freight space available. So we have to compete with that. We can't just put our price up, or we can't cut our price. We have to compete in a very narrow box. So how important is the relationship between us and the surface and the freight forwarder community, not from a data standpoint, but more from the standpoint of how are you seeing things operate today? Where are you seeing adaptation? Talking about borders and the movement of goods in Europe in particular. And do you have any insights as to the lessons we're already knowing we've learned from how we did things before COVID to how we're doing things today in terms of the movement of goods and the relationship between us and the surface and the freight forwarders? John?
Okay, so we're finding, obviously, because we're operating into fewer points at the moment, we're utilising a lot of road surface transport, and some of that's working out a lot better than perhaps we would have thought in the past, so it's giving us some opportunities going forward. Obviously, you talked about sort of pricing and stuff like that. Now, we're kind of in a world, like Vito said, where obviously these flights are coming in at the moment with no passengers on them. We have one or two schedules, but they're pretty much empty in terms of passenger cabins at the moment. So we're having to really manage that capacity and our revenue in such a way that we hit a hurdle that ensures that flight operates. We're kind of micromanaging each departure. We have to make sure it hits that revenue hurdle because we want to maintain a consistent service. Now, what we're finding, if I'm honest at the moment, we're finding obviously the westbound loads are incredibly strong. There's a little bit more of a challenge on finding sort of on certain days of the week and certain routes in terms of the eastbound, but we have to make sure that the combined thing, basically the whole rotation hits that revenue hurdle to make sure it operates, so we can offer a consistent service. So it's something we're doing, pretty much, like I say, micromanaging every single flight, which is pretty labour intensive, but it's working out really well right now.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. And, it's nice when people come together, because we have seen in parts of the world, and this is going to be a question for John and then for Vito, talking about the geopolitics of freight and the movement of goods. There was a lot of coverage given to, certainly out of the United States, and many of the members and attendees on today's webinar will do a significant amount of business with the United States, or at least the broader North American economies. And without engaging in some sort of a character profile or getting into the politics of it, from a practical standpoint, we saw risk to goods being shipped through the United States, particularly personal protective equipment. And so, but historically, the United States has been a major cargo and air freight hub, probably for much of the goods that were on our aircraft too. Given that, for those of you who are not directly involved in the industry, your boxes may go through 7 cities before they get to one. The goods that you're moving, the focus there tends to be more on the security of delivery and on an efficient price, as opposed to going from one city directly to another, as we see in the passenger world. So, Vito, if you could speak to or John, start talking about the geopolitical effects of Brexit and how it has affected the movement of goods across borders within Europe and destined for international export from Europe. And then Vito, I'll ask you if you could comment similarly about how the security of goods moving through the United States has affected the global air freight footprint and route network. I think that would be very interesting. Maybe it's a brief answer there, and then we have some questions from the audience we're going to get to. John?
Okay, Brexit, yeah. Interesting one. So we're obviously in this transition phase right now, so nothing at the moment has changed in terms of goods crossing the channel. There's obviously a lot of speculation as to how it will change. My feeling is that actually not a lot will massively change. I think that there may be obviously going to be some additional checks, but I think both sides of the channel are too reliant on that trade lane to make it a problem. So yes, it might be a bit clunky to start with, but we're kind of hopeful that not a lot will change moving into 2020 really. So we'll see how things go. But yeah, like I say, it's going to be interesting. It's been a bit messy, but the volume of trade between the two partners is too valuable for either party to make it difficult. So I'm personally confident it'll work out.
Thank you. Vito.
As far as the global geopolitical situation is right now, there were a few incidences where in the U.S. PPE products were withheld and offloaded some of the aircrafts and all that. And but as far as the overall flow of goods, they will continue. Look, it becomes so critical that ultimately, if any of that type of activity continues in the future, companies will bypass those countries. So it's not in the best interest of those countries either. So what we're going to see is, and we're going to see the flow of goods changing. Reality is that, and it's in public where, many of analysts are saying there's going to be a number of airlines that will not exist in the future. The global aviation industry will change. The ocean as well will be changing. So what we're going to be seeing is a shift as to how goods get moved. And what we're seeing today is, and we were one of the first carriers to go out there and transport PPE products into Canada and then into other countries. And we continue doing that today. And what we're seeing a lot of demand for Asia into South America. And Canada, and specifically Toronto, is the center, what I call the center of Asia and South America to connect for both countries. And we're seeing a lot of that change now. It historically used to go, either via Miami or via Europe, but now we're seeing more and more coming into Canada. It's a quicker connection, easier connection. So you're going to find different flows moving, but you won't see any real drastic change. And although we're seeing, what we're seeing more of is, and there's a lot of discussion, where will manufacturing move to? You're always going to have global manufacturing. You can't turn that back. But will you have more internal manufacturing where the US or Canada will bring back manufacturing? Yes, it will bring some of that back. But still, you see it, and you look at it, the automotive industry, parts that, come from the US, they get manufactured in Canada, they get shipped back to the US, then they go to Mexico. That flow will continue. You're going to see that flow continuing, and I think it's critical, and you're going to see more and more of these bipartisan, bilateral agreements. So it's going to help us overall.
Thank you. And in fact, it's an interesting, we have a question later that has to do with how we ship things, like some of the more high-tech or manufacturing-oriented products out there, because of course it gets ignored in the media or not covered as sort of rapidly. Everybody's talking about personal protective equipment and all the things that are made in Asia, but the world would do well to remember that a lot of our very innovative and high-tech goods, manufacturing equipment, calibration and measurement equipment, and of course the best textiles and fashions and consumer goods in the world come from Europe. And it's so critical that those make it to North America and that we have it in time for major gift giving and important recovery parts of the season. But the annual season, I did want to go to a question we had. The first one had to do, the question was asked about Zurich and our operations in and out of Zurich right now, where we're focused on cargo. But the belief was, that people see all these Air Canada planes flying around, and they ask, well, are we really just doing this as passenger layovers and we're selling cargo into it? Or let's talk about the importance of Zurich and our other cargo points in Europe. Vito first, and then John to follow up, please, or just have a discussion about it, you two, talk about Europe and what it looks like and how important cargo has been to us and why we're committed to places where we have no passenger capability or demand right now. And where the cargo fits into the equation. The question was asked specifically about Zurich, but I think there are a few cities where this is of particular importance to us. Go ahead, guys.
So I'll jump in there. So remember one thing, Air Canada as a national carrier, like I had mentioned earlier, although we're known for the passenger, we are the largest Canadian cargo service provider, and we go throughout the world. If that supply chain breaks down, if we stop carrying goods, it will have a detrimental impact to the Canadian economy. And so we felt that working with both importers and exporters, and knowing that there was a demand, we decided, how do we make it work? And and Zurich is a perfect example where, right now, Italy, or till most recently, Italy's been very restrictive. It's not easy to operate a flight into Italy, because you might think, well, you just go into Milan and you come back. Well, no, the problem is our pilots. Once our pilots arrive in a country like Italy, or even today in China, they'll have to they won't be able to fly for 14 days. They have to follow the regulations. So what happens is, and they're also human beings, they've got families, and we wouldn't want to put them in a position where their safety is compromised. So therefore, we make a city like Zurich, which doesn't have the same number of numbers of coronavirus as Italy has. So Zurich became an entry point, which historically it's also been an entry point into Italy and then into other European destinations as well. And that's why, like, we look at Zurich, or we look at other destinations like Frankfurt. We can go in, our people can go in safely, we can load the planes, we can work safely. That's the important. Safety is got to be a priority. And if we can allow that, then we'll go into cities. And like right now, we're operating to about, I'd say, 15 different cities, either through our passenger scheduled flights or through our passenger cargo flights. John, from a European perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Vito. So yeah, I mean, Zurich's been quite big for us. So I mean, on Sunday we had 3 flights out of Zurich into Canada. Some of them were mixed loads from lots of different customers, and one of them was one customer totally took the whole plane. So that kind of works really well. And like Vito said, really, so what we've had with the reduced schedule, we kind of ended up with this theory of having a few hubs. So Zurich is one of them. Where we're dragging traffic from north, south, and east everywhere, and then we have Paris and Frankfurt and obviously London. Now we just started flying to Amsterdam, Copenhagen, and we're going to start Brussels tomorrow. So we're slowly starting to increase the schedule in there, and again these points are with road surface where we're dragging traffic into these points and feeding now as demand starts to pick up again. But Zurich's obviously incredibly important for us, and obviously as that starts to grow, we'll be serving more of the Italian market. We've been trucking a lot of Italian traffic up into Paris as well. So I guess it's just, we're just going to see how the demand goes, and but I think for now, those are the key points we're going to serve. As and when demand's there, we'll stick another route in, which we obviously will do.
Well, thank you very much, and so much for my promise that we weren't going to comment on future routes. But I think that's very exciting to know that we've got more coming, more capacity for Europe. This is a very important market for us at Air Canada Cargo. And it's interesting because we do talk about the constraints of trying to balance the passengers and the freight. And now we're in this interesting world where we're all focused on freight. But I think all of us can't wait to get back to the time when we are back to the struggle of passengers versus freight and making everything fit within the passenger schedule, only because that's a big part of what Air Canada does. And it's a big sign that our economies will be back, our confidence will be back, and our safety will be back. So another question we had was about how we move products that are temperature sensitive. We get a lot of demand out of Europe in particular for the pharmaceutical industry, and I think there's going to be a lot of attention paid on that as some new products start to come out that can probably help to address the current COVID situation. My sort of view is that on the day when some successful product is announced, every airplane in the world is going to be heading to the city where it's manufactured, and we can probably, if history is any teacher, expect that Europe to be the tip of the sword when it comes to manufacturing treatments and drugs and pharmaceuticals. So Vito, how do we move pharmaceutical products differently? Are they hazardous? Do they have very particular needs in terms of things like temperature and handling? How do we do that? And can we move things like cultural samples that involve the actual things like sicknesses themselves on board, or is it just cures and vaccines? So Vito, how do we do that? So
and I think it's a very important point that you just mentioned, John, is the whole handling process. So moving forward as an industry, and we need to get the whole industry, the whole supply chain together. We need to create what we at Air Canada call a clean care program. It's going to become so integral, and especially in the pharma industry, and especially in the perishable industry. There's going to, I truly believe, looking medium to long term, there's going to be new regulations that are going to be put forward. So let's be ready for it. And when I look at Europe, and like you mentioned earlier, besides the clothing, automotive, the great food that we import from Europe, all the pharma products that we're importing today from Europe, we do have, a temperature-controlled units like the Envirotainers, to name one, and multiple other type of units that help us manage temperature control. And also, depending on the type of product, we manage temperatures, we track the temperatures, and so there's different ways of managing the pharma. But moving forward, CIVA is in there right now, and I think the regulations are going to get even tighter as we move forward, and not just for the airline, collectively, because you know what? The cleanliness of a warehouse tomorrow will be significantly more important than it is today. So we need to look at all of that and say, how do we play that role? And there's going to be added cost to everyone because the demand is going to be there to make sure that we meet it. And it's no different than how, sustainability reports for different companies that, we've had in the last number of years. And if you can't meet those needs, you will be, blacklisted, shall we say. So I think that becomes very important moving forward.
Thank you, Vito. So we're getting near the end of the Q&A, and thank you everybody for all the questions that you have submitted to be part of this discussion. Vito, we'll start with you and then with John. Certainly for people in certain regions, if people do want to learn more about Air Canada Cargo, or if they would like to make sure that they themselves or their freight forwarder knows where to find us, what's the easiest way for someone to find us? Let's start with North America.
Well, you can call Tony Altomare. No, you can call our, you know what, we're there for you. We work with, and the freight forwarders, like I said, they play a key role. We, as an airline, we don't play a role as far as warehousing, customs clearance and all that. We're part of that whole supply chain. So we work closely with the freight forwarders, and we, if you want to reach us directly because you do not have a freight forwarder, we'll be more than glad to line you up with a freight forwarder that meets your needs. We'll be more than glad to do that. But it is predominantly through the freight forwarder, because there's a lot of, globally, there's a lot of logistics that are required that we cannot provide that a freight forwarder provides today. And I also, on one last note, I think what I'd like to leave off with everyone is, as far as the future is concerned, I think collectively, and not only from a supply chain, I think as industry as a whole, remember what we said earlier, data is going to be very important. That data is going to be key. The clean care programs are going to be extremely important. E-commerce is going to play a significant role. And please get involved in e-commerce. It's not just for the big guys. There's a lot of opportunities for small, medium-sized companies to get involved in e-commerce. And also, once again, the roles. Look at what we're doing today, virtual meeting. This is changing. This will change moving forward. Even a role of a salesperson will change moving forward. So there's a lot of things that you need to take a negative and turn it into positives and say, you know what, let's move forward. The world's moving on. Thanks, John.
And John, thank you, Vito. And John, anything to add to that about how people perhaps in Europe are able to find Air Canada Cargo or appropriately direct their freight forwarder?
I'm just echoing what Vito said really in terms of obviously the various freight forwarders we can help if you need that. Obviously there's all our website, any information's on our website as well. There's contacts you can get to contact us directly. I think when you're looking at choosing an airline, if you can, through your freight forwarder, I mean, like I said, I'm kind of new to Air Canada, but this last year, particularly the last few months, has just sort of opened my eyes to it's an incredible bunch of people. The experience we have at Canada is just amazing. It's like a very long-standing family, and the experience is amazing. And how quickly we've been able to adapt has just really surprised me. So be happy to take your business, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. And to all of the members, I'll make sure that you know, please, that my email and contact information is available through both chambers. And you are welcome to reach out for me. It is myself and my team at Air Canada who are responsible for the cargo business aspect of the chamber relationships. So please, if there's something you need, please find me and I will make sure that you are in touch as quickly as possible with one of our cargo experts. With that, I would say to both chambers and to the Trade Commission, thank you very much for the ability and the honor of moderating Vito and John today. I say stay safe, grazie, merci, thank you, danke, and I now turn it back over to Corrado with great thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
John, thank you for the mastery that you show. You ran really this debate in a great way. Thank you very much to John Lloyd and to Vito Cerone. Thank you. It was extremely interesting. I'm sure that all the audience found fascinating this issue. It is the future. Talking about the future is always exciting. Thank you very much. Thank you to the audience. I want to thank some people in particular, people that have worked behind the scenes. First of all, Charlotte Bornstein on your side, on the side of Air Canada, and Isabella and Tiziana, and all, obviously, our colleagues at ICCO. I want to thank also Matteo Picaiello and Stephen Klass and Tony Altomare, the sponsor. And Tony, please say the final remarks if you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Corrado. So in closing, I wish to thank Vito Cerone for reminding us what the inside of an airplane looks like, perhaps the new COVID-19 airplane, and John Lloyd for being here today. Thank you for your interesting and insightful presentation. Thanks as well to John Tory for your excellent preparation, for moderating our discussion, and for making sure we were able to get the most out of the time we had today. Thank you. And thanks to Matteo at the Italian Trade Commission, Stephen at the European Chamber of Commerce, and again, Corrado. And of course, thanks to all of you for participating today. This ends our webinar. I wish you all a pleasant day. Please take care and stay safe.